Welcome everyone to 121 in Flux. I am Peter and I'm here today to talk about Ghostbusters Afterlife, the first movie that I saw in movie theaters in over a year. So I'll start spoiler free. I'll give you a warning before I go into spoilers. I had to talk about it. I wasn't really planning. I didn't go to see the movie thinking, oh, I should review it. But now that I've seen it, I figured I might as well talk about it. I might as well give my thoughts because I do have thoughts. And it's not all negative, right? I'll get that out of the way. This is a decent movie. It is a decent movie that's perfectly watchable. That is overly nostalgic. It fits into the formula and trend that a lot of these nostalgia sequels are definitely doing. I will say that the plot at least kind of makes it fits with the plot a little better than perhaps some of the other examples that we've had. I do think the cast are pretty good. I think McKenna Grace, who plays Phoebe, the granddaughter of Egon, she is the standout here. She is the lead, and it's actually kind of insane, like how many things I've seen her in already, and she's only like 12. But she's been popping up in a bunch of movies and TV over the last like 3 or 4 years, and it's just kind of interesting that by the time she's like playing the kid in a Ghostbusters like reboot, she's already kind of become this name. Finn Wolfhard from Stranger Things, obviously the inspiration and the idea of having one of the Stranger Things kids in this feels intentional, honestly. Carrie Coon I've always loved. Paul Rudd obviously is very likable. Solid cast by and large. And so yeah, I mean the positives are really quick, and so it feels like I'm going to probably like get a bit cynical here and talk about my overall thoughts, but the characters are by and large very good. Probably one of my favorite running thing in the whole movie is that Phoebe, McKenna Grace's young character, she is awkward at making friends, and she's trying to learn jokes, to tell jokes to people, and her jokes are all really sort of bad, but that makes them kind of great, and it's actually the funniest running gag in the whole movie is all of her bad jokes. So yeah, like positives are it's very dependable. It's not like poorly made. It feels really solid. I would say the pacing in the first 2 acts does feel a little bit meandering, like not a super amount. Like it does kind of feel like it takes a while before there's like a direction, like a goal where the characters can finally start to work together and like focus on like achieving something. And once that kind of hits, once you're going into like nearly Act 3, I think the movie's pacing really feels like it works at that point, but that's not like a huge deal in the movie per se. I mean, all of the other things I'm going to say about this, like you could probably cut and paste from other movies by and large. The over reliance on nostalgia. I was speaking to Tim the other day about this, and movies like this. He's not seen this yet specifically, but I am. There's a lot of movies that are getting made now, like Ghostbusters Afterlife, like Terminator Dark Fate, like Star Wars The Force Awakens, like Jurassic World. There's other examples, no doubt, that I'm not thinking of, right? Halloween 2018 was another one, and Kills by extension. It kind of feels like today we're, by and large, if you're not a big franchise movie, you're making movies that are more about loving the original or the older movies than you are about just making a movie that works on its own. Or not even, like, that's not even fair, because a lot of good sequels don't work on their own, and there's nothing wrong with that per se. If it is just a sequel. But this isn't just a sequel, though. It's it's a whole new set of characters that are, it's tying into the original film. And like a lot of these movies, it's like, well, do any of these movies work, or do they feel special if you don't already have that connection to the original? And then you have the over-reliance on the nostalgia, you have the over-reliance on people being excited because they see things from the original films. And one of the big problems with this is like the reverence that a lot of these movies have, and this is something me and Tim talked a lot about on Halloween Kills, but like every single time they tease one of the traps or the EPK device, the scanner, right? The scanner thingamabob. Like when you first see that, and like every time you see one of these things, or you almost see the car, or you almost see, like, and you go do do do, like the musical really point it out. Like, are you excited because these are things you remember from Ghostbusters? And that's a little old. Like I think my exercise to someone is to imagine that every single time if a movie's overdoing it, right, this will be a problem. But imagine if every single time it was intentionally teasing you something from the original, that it spliced in a clip from Ghostbusters, right? The original Ghostbusters, that moment where they get the first call and Janine like slams down the phone and says, "We got one," and she like slams the bell and wakes up the Ghostbusters. Imagine that clip of her yelling that and the bell ringing, what played after every single time we got one. We got an Easter egg. We got a reference to the original film. It would be annoying as shit because it would be constant. You know, I suppose the other way of saying this is that if you were playing a drinking game where every time they show something or reference something from the original film, it would be a lot. And because the funny thing is that like you go back to Ghostbusters 2, and Ghostbusters 2 and sequels of its time are critiqued a lot for just doing the plot, you know, just doing the same movie again, right, with a slightly different villain, a slightly different circumstance, but by and large the same thing. And a lot of those movies are bad. Although I actually quite like Ghostbusters 2, right? I like Ghostbusters 2 more than this. I'm just going to put that out there. But one of the things that I think works about some of those examples, though, especially with Ghostbusters, because Ghostbusters is not meant to be this special, important film. It's not meant to be this epic journey or anything like that. Ghostbusters is a bunch of blue-collar schlubs who are trying to make money with a business venture that is kind of insane, and that's kind of the joke. And there's a wit to it, there's a cynicism, there's a, you know, Peter Venkman is never really kind of believed in it and is kind of surprised that any of it's real once things like get going, more or less. Like, you know, I haven't watched, it's been at least a year since I watched Ghostbusters, so my memory is not completely fresh, but the general vibe of those characters in that film versus the heartwarming nostalgia of discovering who your grandfather was, and it's the Ghostbusters, which is special to us all. Like, there's this like heartwarming sentimentality to all of it. And the last thing that Ghostbusters ever was sentimental. Right? You can argue whatever you want about Ghostbusters, but you cannot argue that it was a sentimental film. It was never supposed to be. And I'm not saying that you can't have a sentimental thing where we take it forward. You know, my favorite sequel of all time is Aliens. You can't say that Aliens didn't do new things and didn't take it into a new direction, because it did. But you can do it. You can respect the continuity. You can respect the advancements in the story and not reset characters and things like that. But also not just like, you know, I don't feel like, other than the idea in Ghostbusters 2, other than the idea that they've been shut down, right, and they're barely doing anything anymore, and they have to sort of prove themselves again to be allowed to function, I don't think there's much in the way of like, remember this thing from the last movie. At least not in the same way that these nostalgia sequels do it. Like it's like, yeah, we have to get stuff, but you know, Ghostbusters 2 wasn't afraid to have a new color of outfit. It wasn't afraid to have a new thing. And part of this, you could cynically say it's because they wanted more toys to sell, perhaps, because by the time Ghostbusters 2 came around, the cartoon existed and toys were a thing and blah 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 blah. Like there is reasons potentially for that, and top, you know, aside from anything else. But while it might not be as creative as the original film and all the other reasons why Ghostbusters 2 is looked down upon, I quite like Ghostbusters 2, and I think it's just because we've still got these actors all around the same age, and they're going to have the same attitude, and we're just going to give them a fun villain to fight and like play with, you know, just the toys in the toy box, as it were. This is playing with toys in the toy box, but it's every time you pick up one of the toys, you have to stop and go, "Aww, there's the thing. There's a proton pack. She's got a proton pack. Are we all excited?" And they're not all annoying. Like I'm overplaying it a little bit, but this movie does get very tied to Ghostbusters 1. Like, it goes full fan service at a certain point, and it's hard not to feel a little cynical about it. And the more I see movies that do this type of thing, the less and less effective it is. The more and more it just like hits me like, you know, a wet fish. Not that none of the connections are good, not that there's not some smart ways to connect things, because there is, but there is maybe an over, I don't know, an over amount of it, I guess. So as far as other complaints go, I would say that, yeah, the final act, while I do appreciate that there's a goal in mind and the characters are working together, I kind of wish that it wasn't so like copying the first film, and that maybe like we use more of those first two acts to kind of like build the some of the connections between the characters a little bit more. Like I could have used more of them interacting with each other, because the two young kids are kind of separate from the two older kids a lot. I didn't even mention podcast. Yeah, there's this weird trend in movies these past couple of years as well to always have a quirky character who has a podcast. And I say this as someone who podcasts. It's kind of weird and annoying, especially in this case where he literally calls himself Podcast, and he's like doing the creepy thing where he's like, "Oh, this town's got lots of spooky and unexplained things, and I'm going to talk about them." And he kind of befriends Phoebe. That's his character. And it's funny because even like, you know, the Chucky TV show has a character who has his own true crime podcast. Like it's such a, it's almost become the go-to thing for, you know, in older movies when you had a character who was just really obsessed and was like an expert on something like that, where they would really care about it and just have a knowledge about a subject. Nowadays, the shortcut to that is just to say they've got a podcast about it. So that's why they're an expert. That's why they know these things. That's why they know about all these murders that happened in the town, or that's why they know about all these weird supernatural things. So that, but you know, a bit weird on that, but it is what it is. I'll say that. So as far as spoiler free stuff goes, there's something that I predicted, and I think, well, I'm not trying to take credit for this, because I think anyone with half a brain predicted something that may happen by the end of this movie, and I was a little bit worried about it. I could see it being really eye-rolling, and I will talk about how I felt in spoilers, which I think I will quickly go into, because I feel like at this point I just need to talk about stuff that's in the movie. I'm not going to go through every plot point. I don't think I'm interested in doing every plot detail necessarily. Do I do some positive stuff? You know, I kind of like the discovering of the car. I like the kids finding a ghost, using a proton pack, but then having to chase it, and that leading to, and it's in a lot of the early trailers, is the driving the Ecto-1 through the small town. But I kind of dig this a little bit. Like, I think the gunner seat for Phoebe to sit on and like be shooting the proton pack from that was a nice subtle addition to give us like a very different, because you know, I don't know if we ever got a good car chase per se with the Ecto-1. So this felt like a really smart addition to just like, oh, here's something else we can do with one of the most famous movie cars we've ever had. Let's do a car chase where they're chasing a ghost. And I think that stuff is pretty fun, and like having the trap on the little remote control wheels. I think all these little like playing with the rules and playing with the tech that was there is actually quite smart. And likewise, I said that I loved when the characters had like a goal to work together. You know, when they find out that, you know, the town and the world and, you know, is indeed in danger because Gozer's coming back, I do kind of love that they all have to work together to break out of the police station to get all the equipment back so that they can, you know, help save the day. And they think they're on their own. And, you know, we're all kind of suspecting, and we're in spoilers here, let me make that clear, we're in spoilers. We're all expecting that the Ghostbusters, the real Ghostbusters, are going to show up by the end, right? We're expecting help is coming. And by this point in the movie, you know, we've even seen Ray, right? Because Phoebe's called him. Because the number from the old ad from the first movie still works and goes to his occult bookshop or whatever it is. Okay, I'll roll with it. Which actually, this is a good time to mention. So, like, I want to give a pass. Right, I was prepared to give a pass to a character saying, "Who you gonna call?" It's a softball. It's a home run. It wouldn't, for a lot of circumstances, feel that forced to say that line. Somehow they picked the wrong character to say it naturally. So they get put in jail because they were, you know, riding around in the Ecto-1 and the big brother doesn't have a license yet. So they're all put into the tank. And Phoebe's like, don't we get a phone call? And Sheriff Dude, who's like the teenage girl's dad, you know, the camera like, you know, tracks in a little bit. There's a little pause and the music stops and he goes, "Who you going to call?" And I'm like... So, my problem with this is not so much that someone said the line, it just felt really unnatural to me for the police officer to say it to the person. because, and maybe it's just because I don't think I've ever seen a movie where someone in a police station has said, "I want my phone call," and the cop has went, "Who are you going to call?" They never asked. They don't care. Unless there's like a specific reason, or they know them well enough that they suggest someone, or or they'll maybe say something like, yeah, you might need a lawyer, or they'll maybe say something specific like that. But I've never heard them just genuinely be curious about who they're going to call. I feel like it would, and the problem with this is that it would have made much more sense for just one of the other characters to say it. She says, "Don't we get a phone call?" The cop goes, "Well, yes, you do." And then you have Finn Wolfhard turn to his little sister and go, "Who are you going to call?" Like, that would be natural. That would work, because he would genuinely be like, "Well, who are you going to call, though? Like, are you really going to call Mum? Like, are you going to get Mummed out of the station?" It would have made more sense to come out of, like, almost any other character in the scene would have made more sense to say, "Who are you going to call?" than the cop. So, yeah, they overdo it, is what I'm saying. They really milk it, which is, it's part of the nostalgia problem, and like treating every single thing. The first time you see a trap, the meter, the proton pack, the doo-doo-doo. Even Janine has a cameo early on, and Janine gets like the little sound like cue to be like, "Hey, remember Janine? You remember Janine?" Like, I don't know. I just, like, everything has to be treated like this is a special thing from our past. And arguably, yeah, sure, Ghostbusters did very publicly seem to save the world. They were part of this big incident on TV and stuff, which is actually kind of weird that, not so much that all the kids don't know who what it's about it, because it was before they were born, but it is a bit weird that the podcast kid who's into unexplained and paranormal stuff has never heard of the Ghostbusters. That felt a bit odd. Like, I mean, I figured he would, have found out. Like, if you're into a subject, you tend to start to look into it more, and it doesn't matter if some of it happened before your time. But by the time I was 12, like, you bet your ass I knew about horror movies that were out long before I was born. So that's whatever. It's a nitpick. It's not a big thing, but it was there. It was there. So, but yes, no, I like them all working together. I like them having a plan. I like later when they're a bit more confident, and like Phoebe intentionally uses the gunner seat again in front of her mum, and her mum's just kind of in awe of her kid. And honestly, like, as far as references go, I think there is such a thing as a smart reference. And I guess if I'm trying to define what a smart reference is a reference that's not just there for a reference or to like tug on your heartstring, but it's a reference that actually drives either character development whilst also referencing, or works because it advances plot, and like actually, like the reference actually says something other than just the reference itself. It's actually giving you a piece of information about the character, whether it be growth or plot or whatever, right? One of my favorite references to a previous film in a sort of like comeback sequel, as it were, or comeback reboot, is Rise of the Planet of the Apes. There is a phenomenal reference to one of the most famous lines of dialogue in that film, but the way they spin it adds so much meaning that it like doesn't just feel like a cheap reference. It isn't just, it's not a cheap pop. To use a wrestling term, right? A cheap pop is when you say something that the crowd's going to cheer for. The most common example is just mentioning the town they're in. So, I'm happy to be here in, Chicago or whatever, right? And they go nuts, they all cheer because they said the town name. Like cheap pop. Most of these nostalgia references are cheap pops. But sometimes you can have a smart pop where you get that effect as well, but you actually have this like feeling that goes along with it because it's actually saying something. And I think the reference here that I don't even think it's a direct reference per se, but it made me think of it. So when she goes out in the gunner seat and she uses the proton pack, and her mum's all impressed, and Carrie Coon is like, like, "Oh my god, my daughter, what are you?" I don't think she says that exact question, but regardless, Phoebe looks at her and smiles and says, "I'm a scientist." And this worked for me, and I don't even know if it's meant to be a direct reference to like the times in the original where the characters would, I think the one that I always remember is Bill Murray saying, "Back off, I'm a scientist." But this felt to me like one of the best references in the movie, because it reminded me of a thought or a way that people would speak in Ghostbusters, but used it in this new context and used it in this way of a character finding themselves. And it kind of, it was, it's not really a deep character arc in the movie because it doesn't really, I think, go into it too much. But you start with Phoebe where she's like not good at making friends. Her mum's worried about her, and she's not really confident to get involved with people. But now she's like, putting her life on the line to save the world, and she's definitively saying, whatever else you're concerned about, what I am, Mum, I'm a scientist. Like, I know that about myself. I'm confident about that about myself. So it's kind of this nice little reference whilst also actually saying something about the character. And that is a smart reference, I think. Admittedly, I don't know if the reference is completely intentional in this case. In my head, it's a reference, but it works for me way better than a lot of the other things. That's more on the nose and just kind of like, remember this thing. Throughout the film, the ghost of Egon is clearly helping like her discover things. I thought it was a bit weird though that the ghost of Egon seems to want her to find the trap with Gozer on it, and that leads to Gozer being released, which is what leads to them having to do everything else for the rest of the movie. Like, I'm not entirely sure what Egon's ghost was trying to get her to do, because literally they find the trap that has the ghost in it, and immediately like her, Paul Rudd, and podcast are all like, yeah, let's open this son of a bitch. Let's see what it's in it. And that's what causes all the problems. I mean, I think that, the earthquakes were already happening, so I guess the unrest was still happening in the mouth of hell that's in the cave, but I mean, I don't know, it still felt like a weird, I mean, maybe like they had to like let it happen so they could like take them all on, they ultimately, maybe only had one of the spirits and you need to get all three, or I don't know. Anyway, so yeah, that's good stuff. Stuff that that I'm not as fond of, or so the fan service. So I don't mind necessarily that they're using Gozer again. They go into the whole idea that the building the gargoyles were on in Ghostbusters was built by the same guy who built a lot of this town, and he wanted to raise Gozer to like, and it ends up being like a weird cameo by J.K. Simmons, who's like in like a crypt who gets up when everything starts opening up. Whatever. But as the movie's going on, you kind of get that Paul Rudd and Carrie Coon are going to be the gatekeeper and the keymaster, and they're both pretty likable. They're both nice enough characters, and they're kind of fun to see go through some of these motions. It's kind of interesting to me as well that they're able to like this is actually a really smart little thing. I actually really like this detail, is that they use the ghost, so they sneak into where they're all hanging, like where Gozer in the steps with the two beasts are hanging out, right? Because obviously they've turned into the big demon dogs, right? Like the first movie. And they basically sneak one of the traps underneath what turns out to be Carrie Coon's beast. And because they trapped the spirit that was making her into this, she becomes herself again. And it becomes this thing where they then go on the run. This is where the moment happens where Carrie Coon sees her daughter use the proton pack and stuff. But it's actually this really smart thing where Gozer can't be at full power and like do everything she's going to do unless both the gatekeeper and the keymaster are in place. So it becomes this like thing, well, our trap's not powerful enough for Gozer, but we can take one of them. And then it becomes this kind of chase where they're trying to like outrun, and it's all leading back to the farm where Egon had set up like a bunch of traps that are all going to be powered by the superconductor and blah blah blah. And the finale, like I wish a couple of the characters had a little bit more to do. I felt like the teen girl character Lucky, she's nice enough, but it does kind of feel like she's just there to make up numbers. So there's 4 kids, and doesn't really have that much going on. So the big thing that like everyone was expecting to happen by the end, I think, was a ghost of Egon. That we were going to see Egon in ghost form, in CG or whatever. And the kids like almost win but don't quite, and then you hear the voices, and then walk the 3 original Ghostbusters. You got Peter, you got Ray, you got Winston. and they're there. They're like, it's kind of nice seeing them, I guess. I mean, Bill Murray always kind of feels like he's phoning it in when he's doing Ghostbusters stuff now. He just seems to hate it, but maybe that fits Venkman. I don't know. It's kind of hard to tell. It's one of those weird things when you bring someone back after so long that they don't really feel like the same character anymore, even though this is how the actor actually aged. That it just feels like they've moved on. Ernie Hudson, to his credit, does still look good for his age, though. He's still looking like Winston in a lot of ways. As he puts later on, he was the sex appeal of the Ghostbusters, so power to him. But they try, and there's some references to the first film when they first encountered Gozer, and they try to cross the streams, but it doesn't work. Gozer's able to repel it, which it feels like just a quick thing because, oh yeah, like, why wouldn't this work again? Oh, just cause. Gozer's prepared for it, it's fine. Just go with it. So the Ghost of Egon, though, right? I was kind of dreading it, right? It did feel like kind of a cynical move. It felt like an obvious, just like going full ham choice. But I was prepared, because I was so ready for it, I was prepared to just kind of be okay with it. And like sort of take it for the genuine kind of maybe heartfelt gesture it was supposed to be. And the movie is dedicated to Harold Ramis. It says for Harold at the end, which was a really nice touch. But I do think they overdid it. So the first moment with the ghost, I actually think is really good because Phoebe like fires a proton pack at Gozer, and it's like, and she's like struggling, but she's doing okay. And like the others all get kind of knocked away, so it's like, why, she's doing this on her own, and it's kind of this strong moment of power. And then you see the ghost hand around her hand, like, as if she's getting help, like someone's helping her hold this in place. It's not just herself. And the camera comes around, and you see like Ghost Egon like sort of around his granddaughter, kind of helping her and giving her extra strength. I thought that moment is actually very good. It works really well. It plays it, for all the cynicism I can throw at the idea of having Ghost Egon in here. I will say that the plot of the movie does set up for this. The Ghost of Egon is helping her with little hints and tips throughout the whole movie. Like that, the entire movie has been building to it, so it doesn't feel like a cheap thing when it happens at the end. It does feel like the movie has intentionally been aiming for this the whole time. Pardon me. So, that's fair. I can't fault that. I do think, though, that the ghost Egon like hangs around for far too long. He basically just stands around, not speaking, but everyone gets to interact with them. There's a moment where he's standing next to the other Ghostbusters, and they kind of look over, and they say things like, "I should have called. I'm sorry, Egon. We kind of fell apart." All these things. Carrie Coon gets to hug him before he disappears. He sort of has a moment with both of his grandkids. And it's like, all these sweet like moments. I do think they overmilk it a little bit by having them like stick around to have moments with everyone. But the initial moment I think is well done enough. Like would I have still rathered it be more suggestive and not just let's have a CG Harold Ramis? Yes, I would have probably preferred that if I'm choosing, but I won't fault it too much. What's funny about the climax of this movie, which all takes place on a farm, is that it feels oddly both like low stakes but high stakes at the same time, because obviously the world is kind of at stake, because if Gozer gets to do her thing, then she'll take over. But what's funny about it is that I have no problem with a smaller scale conflict, especially when we're dealing with kids that are fighting it, because it's like, well, it's a bit weird if you're in like these beams into the sky and all the rest of it, which kind of happens anyway. But because the first movie ended in New York City and ended on a skyscraper, and it had this big like epic feel to it, bizarrely, for the ending. Which, credit to Ghostbusters, is that despite what it was, like, it actually did feel quite big by the end. I'm dying today, apparently. This does inherently feel smaller, and I don't think it's a problem that it feels small. It maybe feels a bit weird that it feels smaller than the original film. Maybe I'm just so used to modern films, like, oh, we have to be bigger. So maybe I should just be happy with that. But I think it feels like a little bit of a cop-out, though, because while technically it is smaller, it still doesn't necessarily have the effects of a smaller, like, scale, because it still has all the big CG of the the swirling ghost, vortex and beams into the sky and all the rest of it. But I guess this is not really that super like important point I'm making. More just like a weird observation than anything else. I don't know what you do for like more of these. Really, I mean the post credit scene shows that Winston is going to basically fund the Ghostbusters and make Ghostbusters be a thing again. Like he buys the firehouse back. There's a weird inconsistency in the plot because Ray earlier on complains that Starbucks bought the firehouse, but when Winston goes into it in the post-credits scene, it looks like it's been derelict for since they left, basically. So I'm not entirely sure what was going on with that weird inconsistency. It's almost like the post-credits scene didn't get written till later or something, and they just forgot to take out the earlier line, or I don't know. But and the mid and post credit scene are fine. The mid credit scene is Sigourney Weaver gets her cameo with Bill Murray, and they're doing the shock test from the start of the original. But again, it is just like, hey, remember the original? Isn't it nice to have all these people back? Which is nice, right? It's all very nice and decent. But I will say this right now: it's never special. It's never great, and it's never special, and it never really feels like it justifies its own existence necessarily. And I think great sequels, well, they don't necessarily stand completely alone because, sometimes good sequels really do make use of following on from the arcs from the original films or whatever. I do think that it doesn't. It is so reliant upon caring about Ghostbusters. And maybe young people will watch this and they'll like it, but I don't. If I'm being critical, and I have to be critical if I'm going to sit here and analyze and try and explain my feelings, and as more time goes on, because I was quite positive on Jurassic World, and it's not a great movie, but the nostalgia hit me in the right place, and it did kind of the right things, and if this came first, I might feel the opposite. I might feel more what I do for Jurassic World for this, and then Jurassic World would get this speech from me. But it's kind of like as time's going on, and we're kind of like getting more and more of these nostalgia sequels and comebacks. That there's a formula that when I think of things coming back that have just knocked out the park, the Planet of the Apes trilogy is one of them, and that was such a surprise because I don't think anyone expected it to be as special as it was. I think that trilogy of films is better than the original Planet of the Apes because it takes some of the ideas and it makes its own special thing out of it. Not a movie, but Twin Peaks, The Return, from 2017, that new season of Twin Peaks. It came back 25 years after Twin Peaks had been gone, and some people didn't like that it wasn't just more of the same thing and it felt like a new beast, but it really felt like it had something to say. It felt like it had its own new purpose. It felt like David Lynch really had a story to tell that was new and was born out partly of that 25-year difference and all the life experiences from then and ideas that had popped up since then, but mixed in with where plans were in the first place and stuff like that. This movie in turn feels more like it was a writing challenge. Like it was like, okay, we have to come up with a movie idea for like continuing Ghostbusters. It's a bit more heartfelt and nostalgic, and well, I think it does a decent job of it. It still kind of feels like, rather than having like a story to tell, it's like, oh, how can we do more Ghostbusters? And I don't think it ever quite shakes off that feeling throughout. Paul Rudd is a teacher, by the way, really interesting. He just has the summer school kids watch Cujo and Child's Play. Really weird, but interesting choices to show a bunch of 12-year-olds. Technically, I mean, at least, I don't know about Cujo, but Child's Play was definitely R-rated. So, I mean, I wouldn't be complaining. If I was if I was one of these 12-year-olds, I'd be like, yeah, let's watch these movies. Although they're on VHS for some reason. That's just a dig at the school system, I guess. I'm trying to think if I've got any more like broad thoughts or like specific points that I really want to make. Um, yeah, it's one of these weird things where it feels like a lot of these sequels that are being made just now, and partly it's because of the studios want these happy feelings for audiences to come back and love these franchises again, so they can keep milking the franchises for more entries and more merchandise and all the rest of it. But part of it also might be that we're dealing with like an audience of we're dealing with a generation of filmmakers who by and large grew up loving certain things from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So now, like, they're being roped into doing these reboots. So instead, and so I guess what I'm saying here is I would much rather have a new film that you could tell is inspired by Ghostbusters. You could look at it and go, oh, Jane Smith here, this new director, this new hotshot director, this up and coming. She clearly was inspired by Ghostbusters. She's grew up watching Ghostbusters. You can see kind of the influence of the wit and the influence of like maybe the types of characters that are in the film and the type of like scenario that they're going to be in. But I would much rather have something that you can recognize the influence of Ghostbusters, but it's very much doing its own thing. Because at least then it wouldn't like go, it wouldn't be like, oh my god, it's the proton pack. Oh my god, we all have to like be in awe of the proton pack for the first time again, So I guess ultimately what I'm saying is that it's like a 6 out of 10. And I realize I talked a while there to get to 6 out of 10, but it's fundamentally that's what it is. It is a decent enough movie. It's pretty inoffensive. It's got likable cast members for sure. It's got some fun ideas here or there that are sprinkled in, but it does have the nostalgia sequel kind of fan service stink to it as well. And I think like in a lot of ways it comes back to what I said at the start, is that there's a lot of movies being made today that are more about how much did we love the old movie than they are about here's why you should love this movie. And I think that is a continuing problem that I am going to keep monitoring, that I'm going to keep noticing, and we'll see how it plays out with more stuff. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know where you go for the sequel. I started this thought earlier, but obviously Ernie Hudson is like starting up Ghostbusters as a thing again, but at the same time I'm like, yeah, but if you're doing a sequel to this movie, you can't need to have the kids, but how do you work the kids into the plot in a way that doesn't feel contrived, because they're not the ones to discover the story again or discover that there's something going on, so I don't know what you do there. I don't know what you do there, but I suspect if it's doing well enough, they'll probably want to do another one, and we'll see. I guess it's decent. It's decent. I don't really like give a glowing recommendation though. I do think it is nostalgia porn in a lot of ways, and it's sad to say that, because I do see like the there's ideas in there, there's arcs that are kind of in there, there's good moments, good ideas that I can see kind of forming a better realized version of this movie. Maybe it's a simple case of just needing a couple of redrafts and like just like reining in a little bit of the awe of every detail that comes from the original Ghostbusters. Like treat some of it like it's just details, that they're just happenstance. They're just, this is what the thing looks like because that's what the trap looked like. This is what the whatever, right? Like hey, whatever. Anyway, you've had enough of me rambling. This has been my thoughts on Ghostbusters Afterlife, which is a decent enough movie, but nothing great, nothing special. So 6 out of 10 from me. Let me know what you thought of the movie in the comments below. You can like and subscribe, all that stuff. Get me on the Twitters at mailed_fuzz for channel updates. Or sorry, actually, this is on the movie channel. So this is at Screams Midnight for the channel updates. You can get me personally at Wibble89. And of course, you can support everything we do over at patreon.com/mailfuzztv for as little as $1 per month and keep all the content coming, get some bonuses, all that stuff. I can't speak anymore. So I'm wrapping this up right now. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time. Keep watching movies. And if you can get it, it's always nice to have diplomatic immunity.